speaker this evening, Emily Provance. Emily is a traveling minister, author, retreat leader, lecturer, and member of 15th Street Meeting in New York. She is passionate about making Quaker faith and practice more visible and accessible for anyone seeking a deeper spiritual journey. Her focus is on ministry, multi-age inclusion, outreach, young adults, leadings, spiritual gifts, and community. Emily is engaged in various spiritual accompaniment and social media-based ministries, and she travels with a minute from her monthly and yearly meetings. On her blog, Turning, Holy Experiments Among Friends, she explores an outreach model for Quaker meetings that is geared towards the experience of seekers. Emily has served in various capacities in New York Yearly Meeting, including young adult, field secretary, youth program, and more. As an FWCC traveling minister in 2017, she led workshops in discernment, courage, leadings, and concerns, supporting ministry, technology, and algorithms in relation to social justice, spiritual gifts, and spiritual authority. She has offered several Friends journal articles, including The Grief and the Promised Land, Feeding Young Adults with a Taste of Abundance, and Envisioning a Broader Quaker Membership. I'd like to convey the thanks of Yearly Meeting, and in particular from the Gathering Committee. I've heard real thanks for her leading to contributing her leading to our theme, What Now, which has inspired an awful lot of how this gathering's been organized. And so we thank Emily for that. Emily will speak from the silence. Let's gather, friends.
Friends, it's really good to see you again. I want to start by thinking back to March of 2020. March 9th, specifically of 2020, was a Saturday. And I remember that it was warm in Richmond, Indiana. We were walking from one building to another without our coats. And we were finishing a multi-day board meeting of FUM, Friends United Meeting. And on that very last day, everybody else was going home, and I was going to stick around for another couple of weeks. So we crowded together at lunch, saying goodbye. And I remember sitting by the table closest to the door, and I was eating a dry sandwich and a really good chocolate chip cookie and having lemonade to drink. And I remember leaning across the table to hear people better. As each person left, we were waving and we were saying goodbye, see you in Kenya this summer. Several of these people are personal friends of mine, so I went out into the parking lot and we had a last hug. And of course, I didn't realize it was a last hug for quite a while. I think I would not have let go as quickly as I did if I had known that. 13 months later, I look back at that and I think that that day could almost define normal for me. It really could. The act of eating together, standing hip to hip in the buffet line, calling people's names, saying, "Pass me another cookie," with our bare hands, discussing all the minutia and leaning in to hear, and we were hurrying through the meal so nobody would miss their flight. We were hugging, we were assuming that we would keep traveling, we were assuming we would just about see each other again. And then 4 days later, we hit a global pandemic. And 5 days later, churches and businesses were shutting down. 6 days later, I took an emergency flight to the East Coast and the airports were almost empty. And 8 days later, most of the schools were closed. A month later, almost everyone who had been at that meeting had either lost or nearly lost a personal friend to COVID-19. If you are hearing me speak tonight, you have survived something massive, a global pandemic and a nation in chaos, an attempted taking of the Capitol building, job loss, 3 million COVID-19 deaths worldwide and counting, confusion and grief and isolation, and learning new skills and missing your friends, a community trauma. And it's hard to feel the weight of that. And I mean that in two different ways. For some of us, it's hard to make ourselves feel the weight of that because we have been surviving by not feeling the weight. And for others of us, we are feeling the weight and it is excruciating. And some of us are swinging back and forth between those two. And it's even harder to make meaning out of all of this because we are still living it. It's not over. We haven't had distance yet. And by the way, you're not under obligation to make meaning. But when this yearly meeting approached me last summer to serve as the Walton lecturer, I said then the only thing that I could think of that could possibly be meaningful in April of 2021 was what now? I remember saying that we would be either still in or just coming out of a pandemic. I did not predict anti-racism protests and counter-protests and white supremacists and violence, an election that wasn't called for days or an attempted insurrection, and we got all that too. So tonight, what my intention is to reflect on what has happened, to talk about how it has impacted and will impact us, and to look for God in all of it. I am going to do it imperfectly because normally this kind of reflection comes from a distance, either years after the fact or from someone who is outside of the situation. And this time nobody's outside the situation. And also it's not over. I'm led to reflect anyway because we are making decisions about what's next. We have been changed, and if we don't know that and name that, we will not be fully faithful in our next steps because we're not called to be the people we were before. We are called to be the people we are becoming. When I think back, the dominant emotion I remember first is confusion. From the time that it all began, we were so caught in confusion. What's really going on? Where is the virus? Who is actually threatened? How bad is it? Is it only in the cities? Do I need to Lysol my groceries? Mask, no mask, gloves, no gloves? How big a group is too big of a group? What does the term social distance mean? Who's telling us what and what is their motivation? Are we overreacting? Are we underreacting? In 1941, after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, Roosevelt made a 7-minute speech on the radio, and 81% of households in the United States were listening. The president affirmed people's fear and outrage. He made clear the facts, he acknowledged the grief and collective trauma, and he offered assurance of eventual victory and a return to safety. And then he stopped talking, and the people were left with a unified understanding of events, including two things. There is a genuine danger, and their leader had a plan. But if Roosevelt had been president last year, he'd have had a very different communication challenge, because today, 81% of households don't listen to anything at the same time, including the season finale of reality TV. Think about Roosevelt's radio address like a mirror reflecting the state of the world to the people. The image in that mirror might have been accurate or it might have been distorted, but we only had one mirror, one story to listen to. And at some point since then, somebody shattered the mirror. And like the shards of a shattered mirror, every source of information reflects the world differently. Every news channel, radio channel, politician, newspaper, magazine, blog, and YouTuber is telling a different story. So we are reacting not to a single version of events, but 1,000 different ones. And even if we could count on every human to react reasonably to the situation they perceive, which would be no small thing, we still would not react in a unified way because we don't have agreement on what's going on. And nobody listens to a 7-minute speech and then turns the radio off. We are hooked into a 24-hour machine. Instant access to endless information of varying degrees of accuracy. So we watch and listen and read and react. And a lot of what we're witnessing, it just feeds our fear and our confusion. And we can choose to disengage. Sometimes we do. At one point, I decided to try a new discipline, not being hooked into the internet 24 hours a day. I decided I would block my own online access from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. And I tried it for one day, January 6th of 2021. I came back on to discover that we were in the midst of an insurrection, which is enough to make me never turn the internet off again. It isn't just that I missed the event, I had missed the communal emotional processing of the event. And I was also scared about what else could happen, maybe even closer to me, and I wouldn't know to take refuge or run away. Turning off our access to 24-hour information can feel unsafe. And it can feel like not caring too, because to bear witness is a holy task. And we know that. But no human soul can bear witness to everything. And until pretty recently, it wasn't possible to try. So which story are we listening to? If we're looking at 1,000 different reflections of the world at that shattered mirror, how do we know what's going on? We're actually pretty good at uncertainty about the future. Human beings are wired for future uncertainty, to not know what's going to happen next, because we grow accustomed to that from the time that we're born. So some occasional anxiety about tomorrow is manageable, as long as we know how to handle today. What we're not very well wired for is an uncertain present, to not be clear on what's happening right now. We can't delay decisions about right now. And that compels us to do whatever it takes to perceive our current situation. It's like you can't turn the steering wheel left or right if you don't know where the other cars are on the road. If we can't perceive now, if we really don't know what's going on, we're stuck in immediate crisis mode, which is exhausting. Sometimes when we can look back at things with a little bit of distance, it can actually be funny how we respond to crisis mode. I actually think about Forrest Gump. There's a point when he says, sometimes people do things that just don't make no sense. And that was the great toilet paper shortage of March 2020. Some people reacted to the crisis by purchasing toilet paper, and some by doubting everything. Others started painting or singing. Others got down on their knees and prayed. And one friend of mine in the early days of the pandemic kept posting things on social media, and they were all different, but all of them basically said, "This is terrible, this is terrible, this is terrible," which was true, and also at the time I thought incredibly unhelpful. But it wasn't unhelpful. It was lamentation. Somebody had to cry out to the Lord, and it was not going to be me, because I was too busy making videos and gathering resources and launching a virtual retreat series. And if I couldn't find anything else to do, I was doing laundry and sweeping floors and making my bed. It is natural in times of crisis for each of us to lean into our gifts. We feel this desperate need to do something, and the easiest thing is to do something we're good at. So in the last 13 months, some of us have been lamenters, and some, like me, organizers. Others have responded to the crisis by being technical support, or spiritual accompaniers, or teachers, or prayers. We've had caregivers and protesters and agitators and prophets. It is natural for us to lean into our gifts. That's one way that we reclaim power when circumstances are out of our control. It's also why, for some of us, it has been so hard to be prevented from using our gifts. Some of us have been constrained by circumstance in ways that make it really hard to serve others in the ways we know best. In a time of crisis, we do better if we can do what we've been made to do, use the gifts that God has given us, and cope as God has equipped us to cope. But there's a danger, because sometimes we think, well, this way, my way, this is the only way to respond. Why can't they see that what they're doing doesn't matter? We have to do what I'm doing. That's how we will be saved. Spiritual gifts work together like puzzle pieces to make a picture. The prophets need the organizers, the teachers need the prayers, and so forth. We're supposed to complement each other in different roles. But we're also wired in a crisis to narrow our focus and block everything but immediacy out. My patience and my gratitude for diverse perspectives dwindles very fast when I perceive a threat to my existence or the existence of people that I love. A lot of times when this happens, we can benefit from the point of view of an outsider, somebody distant from the situation who's not caught up in the emotions of the crisis, who can see and articulate something wider. But in the last 13 months, nobody's outside. Everybody's in the mess, including the people who usually articulate for us. There have been times when I have wanted so much to pick up the phone and ask for help, and I have no way of knowing if the person I'm calling might be in a worse situation than mine. So we're here, we're looking at the fragments of a shattered mirror. We're perceiving each of us a slightly different story, and each responding from our giftedness and mostly too panicked to be capable of envisioning somebody else's perspective. I try to imagine what the prayers must sound like. Very loud and not harmonious. What this has to feel like and sound like from the point of view of God. One time on the phone years ago, my mom asked me, "Why do you not fear terrorism living in New York City? Why don't you worry about this?" And I asked her, "Why do you not worry about tornadoes living in Illinois?" The answer is that you grow accustomed to certain threats. Speaking generally, everyone has an overall threshold of acceptable risk, and that threshold is higher or lower for different people, and we also react differently to different threats. There are some that we assume are part of our existence, and others come out of nowhere and take us by surprise, which is why my mom finds terrorism so much scarier than tornadoes, even though mathematically a tornado is more threatening. Tornadoes are factored into her concept of normal, and terrorism isn't. Many people who live in the United States and most of us who are present today don't usually worry about access to food and water and shelter. In fact, we have the whole two bottom rungs of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You remember that from high school? Abraham Maslow said that human needs can be sorted into 5 levels, that it's like a pyramid and you have to meet the needs on one level before you can move up and worry about the next. And at the bottom, he puts food, water, warmth, and rest. Above that, safety. Above that, love. And above that, prestige and esteem and being our best selves, achieving our full potential. I think that one reason why so many people bought so much toilet paper was because we were experiencing a threat to our basic needs. Many people in this country do not assume that our access to food or water or rest will be threatened. We factor in a certain amount of injury risk from something like a car accident, but for the most part, we're not prepared for this kind of uncertainty. It's not factored into our concept of normal. So when the pandemic started, those of us who are not accustomed to feeling unsafe were scared about our safety and at the same time shocked to be scared about our safety. And people who don't usually worry about basic necessities also don't form communities that share things like basic necessities. Our ancestors lived in communal settings, multiple generations. If you go back far enough, you find his prehistoric human settlements where multiple families lived in the same cave. And in that kind of setting, resources are often shared. There's no real danger that one family will be fed and another family not. But for us, living in individual homes, individual family units, in some cases totally alone, we're accustomed to meeting our own basic needs. So if I suddenly have a genuine reason to believe that New York City might run out of pasta, I feel the need to go and buy 6 boxes of pasta. I'm not used to my access to food being threatened. I'm not in the habit of relying on community sharing, and my drive to survive kicks in. So after that first set of grocery runs, we run into Maslow's second tier, which is security, safety. That's including the drive to be safe from the virus. And to achieve that, there are 3 basic workable strategies. The first strategy is to trust the existence of a threat. If we do that, we take actions to mitigate the threat. We stay inside. We wear a mask. We keep our distance from people, wash our hands, work remotely, close the schools. This is also where some of the confusion comes from, because in March of 2020, we were not getting clear messaging about what was and wasn't safe. The truth was nobody knew. But people following this strategy will do whatever is necessary to prevent exposure to the virus. That's the pathway they can see to be safe. The second strategy is to deny the existence of a threat. Psychologically, this works every bit as well as the first strategy. I need to feel safe. I feel safe if there is no threat, so I decide to believe that there is no threat. And if I genuinely believe this, I've met my need for safety. It's possible that eventually actual illness will break through my denial, but the human brain has an amazing capacity for convincing itself of things that are not true. The third strategy is kind of a middle way. There is a threat, but it's not all that bad. So I take a few precautions, but I don't take all of them, and I compensate by believing that the virus isn't really in my area or my friends don't have it. Most people survive. This strategy works because I genuinely believe I'm taking an appropriately moderate response to a moderate threat. Actual measurable reality, when we look at scientific studies and statistical observation, tells us COVID-19 is a severe and unpredictable disease, and it can only be stopped by taking specific widespread public health measures. So if safety really is such a fundamental drive, why would some people choose a denial strategy? I think it's because safety is not only about our physical bodies. We also have a drive for mental safety. And mental safety is rooted in identity. I feel safe only when I know who I am, only when my sense of identity is not threatened. I'll give you a couple examples of what I mean. One of the ways that we achieve a sense of identity is by community memberships. For example, I'm a former Girl Scout. Technically, I am part of a community of many millions of former Girl Scouts. But this does not give me very much sense of identity. Oh, I saw somebody wave. There's another one. This is a true fact about me, but it doesn't feel important. So I don't have any particular drive to act like other former Girl Scouts. And if somebody told me I was a bad former Girl Scout, I'm not going to experience that as a threat. If somebody said to me, I don't like former Girl Scouts, my internal reaction would be like puzzled, kind of. But I'm also a New Yorker. I'm part of a community of 8 million people who live in New York City, and this is hugely important to me. It gives me a lot of sense of identity. And for that reason, I want to act like New Yorkers. I move fast, I value diversity, I do not waste time on social graces in the checkout line, and on an escalator, I will be walking on the left and standing on the right. Thank you. If somebody told me that I was a bad New Yorker, or if somebody said to me, I don't like New Yorkers, I would experience that as a threat. That would really make me angry. This is not logical, but that is irrelevant. So if your political party or your profession or your neighborhood or your church is a significant source of your identity, and if members of that community are using the denial strategy to cope with the pandemic threat, you are very likely to choose that too, because the safety of your sense of identity is as fundamentally important as your physical safety. And then once you've made the choice, you're caught in cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is the feeling that we experience when our previous decision doesn't line up with what was, in retrospect, actually the right idea. It's that feeling that we have chosen wrongly or inconsistently with our own ideals. It is so disturbing that it tends to actually wake us up in the middle of the night. And so humans have a way, a safety valve, that keeps us from experiencing too much cognitive dissonance. The moment we make a decision, any decision, we start seeking confirmation that our decision was right. Our brain actively registers new information that supports the decision, and it ignores or rejects information that doesn't support it. We don't do this consciously, but we all do it. In fact, it's really hard not to do it, even if we're trying. So if you've decided that the virus isn't a threat and you've acted accordingly, your brain is invested in confirming that decision for you, and the fractured mirror phenomenon of information sources only makes that easier. Listen to the ones that offer confirmation and turn the others off. I'm going to come back to this, but first I want to go back to the story of those who chose strategy 1, act to keep ourselves safe from a genuine threat. It's worth noting, by the way, that most of us gain sense of identity from communities that also made that choice, which reinforced our decision. We're not immune from the phenomenon of identity safety. But once we decided to avoid the virus, what happened next for us? Going back to Maslow, there's food, water, rest, safety, love. In most cases, the circumstances of the pandemic have not caused us to be loved any less. But here's the thing. How do you experience love? Our physiological needs, food, water, need to be met daily, and our need for safety has to be met even more frequently. I think that love works the same way. I think I can't hear I love you once and check off the love box permanently. I need to actually receive and give love consistently. I don't know if you know author and pastor Gary Chapman, but he talks about love languages, which is a reasonable way to think about this. He defines 5 love languages. There's words of affirmation. I love you. I'm really glad I know you. Quality time, playing baseball together. Physical touch, hugs and kisses. Acts of service, mowing somebody's lawn. And gifts, box of chocolates. Most of us are drawn most naturally to 1 or 2 of those things. How accessible are they to people who are self-isolating in order to achieve safety? Acts of service, sort of still accessible. Nobody outside of my household can wash my dishes for me, but they could offer to share my event on social media or rake my leaves or take minutes during the online meeting. Words of affirmation can also sort of still get through. Somebody can write me an email or call me or Zoom me and say, I love you, or I appreciate your sense of humor. But these things have to be planned. It doesn't happen in the middle of a potluck spontaneously. We can still give each other gifts through the mail or dropping something off at a doorstep, but most of the time the gift giver doesn't witness the pleasure of the receiver in real time, and that makes a difference. Quality time suddenly has to be scheduled, and we're limited in how we can do it. It requires either a remote connection of some kind or else a visit outside. And physical touch is just out if you don't share a household with someone. Most people I know who live alone, including me, have not had a hug or a handshake in over a year. I think that we're probably loved, all of us, as much as we were 13 months ago, and we know that intellectually, we know that, but we're not getting the opportunity to experience it. A couple of years ago, Quakers in New York Yearly Meeting lost a beloved friend. Her name was Mia, and she was a child of God and beloved to us, and we miss her. But the story I want to tell you is not the story of Mia. I want to tell you the story of the people who grieved Mia. First, everybody knew when she was sick. We wrote her messages. We called her, we texted her, we visited. We expressed our love and our gratitude when she felt well enough to come to meetings. We prayed for her. We made plans for how we could help her family. We even reached out to support the members of her monthly meeting because we knew they were struggling. And when Mia entered hospice, everybody knew. And when she died, the monthly meetings announced it at their next gatherings for worship. Her local meeting held a memorial meeting, and Powell House Retreat Center held a simultaneous memorial because so many people loved Mia that we couldn't all fit in the same building. And then her non-Quaker community, the people that she sang in choirs with, they held another memorial at another time, this one all music. And months later, we had one more memorial meeting at the end of a yearly meeting gathering. In other words, we took our time to grieve Mia before and after she died. The fullness of our grieving process accurately reflected the fullness of our love for her, which has not been my experience during COVID. It never occurred to me before to be grateful for opportunities to grieve. New York Yearly Meeting has lost friends. Every yearly meeting has lost friends. But we haven't had the same kinds of chances to grieve. We didn't get to reach out. We didn't prepare. And afterwards, we couldn't physically gather. We couldn't bring potato salad for the family. We had Zoom memorials. And then often a couple weeks later, a different one for somebody else. Most of the time, a single death is enough to put our world on pause, to push back our deadlines and rearrange our days. Even when somebody that we love loses someone they love, somebody who's a total stranger to us, we will stop what we're doing to honor the loss. We show grief in the same ways we show love: words of affirmation, quality time, physical touch, acts of service, and gifts. Because grief is a manifestation of love. It is how we experience love in death. Just as we have to love, we have to grieve, and that's been really hard to do. Okay, so where does this leave us? Where are we now? Given how hard we are working for food, water, rest, and safety, and given how difficult it has been to receive love, is it any wonder that we are struggling with Maslow's 4th and 5th tiers, with esteem and achieving our full potential? What a time to be trying to love our enemies. We've been experiencing a pandemic, but in the last 13 months, we have also been engaging with racism and violence and political corruption and fake news and homophobia and very nearly a coup. More has been asked of us collectively than ever before, and our fundamental needs are less met than ever before. And I keep going back to my friend who was posting on social media, "This is terrible, this is terrible." Lord, out of the depths I have called for you, hear my cry. Every now and then I don't have the words, and the Psalms do. What now? There's a passage in the Bible, 1 Kings 18 through 19, in which the prophet Elijah battles the evil prophets of Baal all by himself. And it takes days, and he is exhausted, and he barely survives. And then Jezebel, who's the queen, sends him a message threatening to kill him. Elijah is scared, and he runs off into the wilderness and throws himself on the ground, and he says, "God, it's too much. I can't do it. Just let me die." And God sends an angel. And the angel says, "Elijah, I think you need a snack." The angel gives him food and water. And then the angel says, "Okay, now Elijah, take a nap." And Elijah does. And lo and behold, everything is a little bit better. We keep wanting the what now to be profound. I know I do. It feels like we can only respond to the last 13 months with something grand and difficult, but really, it starts with a snack and a nap. Begin with you. Did you eat? Have you slept? When is the last time you drank a glass of water? If those three things have not been taken care of, I don't believe God is asking you to do anything else. The first step to faithfulness is making sure you have food, water, and rest. God has no body but your body, and your body does not work without those things. If you're taken care of, then check on your team. Who are the people who are with you when you're asking the question, what do we do next? Are you sure that they have food and water and rest? This is kind of tricky because people you would have assumed 13 months ago were physiologically cared for, they might not be now. The circumstances might have changed. Somebody might be food insecure who wasn't before. Somebody might have a greater need for rest. And speaking of changing circumstances, if there's somebody who would have been at the meeting 13 months ago and they're not now, whether that's a Quaker meeting or a work meeting or whatever it might be, do you know why they're not there? Are you sure they're not absent because they are trying to secure food and water and rest? Can you check on them? And in this step, you're not worrying about whether everybody in the world has food and water and rest. Start with you and then the people in your immediate community. That is enough for a first step. And it might take a while. You might all need a significant amount of food and water and rest. Even in the Bible, Elijah did not bounce back right away. Actually, he has 3 snacks and 2 naps. It goes snack, nap, snack, nap, snack, and then he's ready to go on. Then comes safety. And again, I think you have to start with yourself, because if you skip over this, you will keep coming back to it whether you like it or not. Do you feel safe? What makes you feel safe? It is possible that these answers have changed. I talked earlier about the fact that we all have a personal risk threshold. Yours might be lower than before, or it might be higher, or it might be sideways, with some things feeling scarier than they used to and other things aren't scary at all anymore. This is really unpredictable after trauma. That sense of fight or flight can linger. We might feel physically threatened, even if there's no threat. And then there's psychological safety, the kind that's rooted in knowing who you are. I touched on this one a little bit before, but I'll say it again, that one source of identity is community membership. Quaker, person of color, 7th grader, Republican. Some community memberships are chosen, others are a matter of birth or circumstance. In the last 13 months, have you left a community or joined a new one? Has community membership become more or less important to your identity? Or have there been societal changes in the way your community is treated? How does that influence your sense of identity? This all matters because our habit is making the person we were 13 months ago feel safe. And if we try to return to normal without processing the change, that normal self-care practice isn't going to match our new selves. We've changed. The world has changed, and our understanding of the world has changed. It'll take some time and some reflection to feel steady on our feet. We've got to tell our stories. And just like before, check on your team. Do the people you love or work alongside feel safe? Have we listened to each other's stories? Do we know how to support each other? All of this comes before whatever goal it is that we're trying to reach together. All right, so food, water, rest, physical safety, sense of identity. love, which includes grief. This is the part that many of us have been dreaming of. It's the chance to be together again and revel in the togetherness. I've been thinking of this kind of like an old-fashioned video game where there's a life bar on the side and it functions like a thermometer, and the level drops every time you get hit by like a Goomba. Do you remember Goombas? Probably not. And then it goes back up every time you find a mushroom or a glowing pellet. And I think that our love works a lot the same way. Right now, we're all really low on our life bar because we haven't had all that many opportunities to recharge those words of affirmation, the touch, service, gifts, and quality time, and we keep getting hit by Goombas. There have been Goombas everywhere for months and months. But here's what's cool. Recharging the life bar works both ways. If we receive love, our life bar goes up. And if we give love, our life bar goes up. I think that even when we grieve, our life bar goes up because this, even though it is painful, is love affirming. And we're about to have a lot more opportunities for this. Just one last word about these first steps for ourselves and our immediate communities, which is, I don't think that these tiers have to happen in succession, 1, 2, 3. Life is not that neat. One of the ways that we show our love is by making sure we all have food and water and rest, telling and hearing stories, helping each other feel safe. Eat and feed others, find safety and help others be safe and be loved and love. That's what's now first. Someday we're going to tell this story. We're going to tell it in a million different ways, in plays and movies and books and paintings and poems and speeches. And about 15 years from now, you might be in a room and realize the person you're talking to has no firsthand memory of 2020, but they'll know the story. And the story that they have heard is going to be a lot tidier than what I've just said to you, because that's how making meaning works. The farther we get away from something, the easier it is to make it neat, which is good because it's not helpful to hand a big ball of mess to the next generation. Learning to tell the story is part of finding the wisdom that we have been lacking. Like, what do we do about all the really big problems that we have not solved? I really do believe that food, water, rest, safety, and love are the priorities, because if they're not, nothing else gets done. But also racism, violence, political corruption, fake news, homophobia, the real possibility of another coup, earth care, hunger, and. When we tell inspiring stories, we always say that the people came together in the face of danger. That's the end of the movie, right? In the beginning, it's every person for themselves and mass confusion, and the monster, literal or figurative, can kill because the people are all separated, all out for themselves. But eventually somebody says, hey, let's get together, and there's this small group of newly allied heroes who vanquish the monster, because that is how movies end. I don't think a small group of intrepid heroes is enough this time. Our monsters are world-size monsters. Humans cannot do this by ourselves, relying on ourselves. We will need each other, and we will need God. Remember what Jesus said? I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came to me. As you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers, you did it to me. It sounds like Jesus was on the same page as Maslow. When the people asked what they should do to be righteous, he told them to give others food, water, and company. And by the way, this isn't a revelation. We've known for a very long time that we need to end hunger and ensure access to clean water. But in my daily life, even in my finest moments, I don't have the ability to make that happen on a global scale. That is not what now, it's what we're working toward. But to get there, we have to first have billions of individual interactions, little encounters, moments when we cross paths with another human. When we enter a difficult conversation with someone, or if a person behaves in a way we know to be harmful, does it ever occur to us to make sure that they are not hungry, thirsty, or tired? I know that I'm not capable of being my best self if my physiological needs are not met. So surely the same is true for whomever I'm talking to. This is one reason social media interactions often go so wrong, because you can't know if your conversational partner is hangry. And then supposing the physiological needs are met, are we safe? Starting with physically safe. Remembering there's no such thing as completely safe, are we each functioning under our individual threshold of acceptable risk? When we're entering a difficult conversation, if one or both partners feels unsafe, it is hard to engage with anything beyond the drive to achieve physical safety. And it's worth noting, some of us are genuinely less physically safe than others, even when we're faced with the same environment. Children are often less safe than adults. Men are often safer than people who are not men. People of color are often less safe than people who are white. When we're in a position of relative privilege, we might feel quite safe and feel tempted to tell the other person that they are too. But telling someone who feels unsafe that they shouldn't feel unsafe almost never works. The message that comes across is, you are both unsafe and disbelieved. If we're trying to have a high-level conversation with a person who feels unsafe, we have to either address the safety concern, or if that's not possible, have that conversation another time. We also have to talk about psychological safety, that identity piece, which is a little bit different story. Some of you might have been wondering why I'm including sense of identity in my definition of safety. That's not a universally assumed idea. For me, it makes sense, and I root it in a sociological theory about identity and extremism. It's been studied mostly in connection with radicalization and terrorism, and the idea is, what I've said, a person needs a secure sense of identity. We have to know who we are to feel safe. So the connection between identity and extremism, like I've said, community membership lends us a sense of identity, but not every community provides the same degree of sense of identity. New Yorker makes up a big part of my identity, former Girl Scout, not so much. Here's the theory. All people need a certain amount of sense of identity, and that can be obtained in multiple ways. One way is community membership, and you can either get that identity from belonging to several groups, each of which matters less, or one group that matters a lot. It's like getting the right number of identity points. The second option, the one group that matters a lot, is faster and easier, and extremist groups give a lot of identity. The more extreme the group, the more specific the rituals and beliefs and behavior and enemies of the group. In other words, the group is more distinct from society in general, and the more distinct, the more identity its members can get from the group. A person whose sense of identity is threatened is a lot more likely to join an extremist group because they're in so much need of identity. There is not a clear line between extremist and not extremist groups. Many groups have extremist tendencies. The far right is an example of this, and so is the far left. Extremist does not mean fundamentally evil. It means having strict and specific rituals, beliefs, behaviors, and enemies, and by that definition, both right and left qualify. If you're part of a community and you're wondering how extreme it might be, try imagining what would happen if you noticeably violated the community's rituals, beliefs, behavior, or definition of enemies. The stronger the community reaction would be, the more extreme that group is likely to be. Extremism by its very nature undermines compromise and any attempt for mutual understanding, because being a distinct us requires a distinct them, which makes it psychologically unsafe to venture out into the middle, to say, I'm in agreement with some things our group says and some things that other group says. Even if that's how we feel, it doesn't feel safe to say it. Moreover, the stronger each of the groups becomes, if them is stronger, us feels more threatened. And so two groups in opposition with extremist tendencies will be inclined to each become more extreme, even if that underlines their higher ideals. So what do? I'll come back to that in just a minute. Because after safety, we're back to Maslow's third tier, which is love. And Jesus had things to say about this one too. Love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, soul, and mind. Love thy neighbor as thyself. Love one another. Love thine enemies. I have to confess, in the past, I have kind of watered down that word love and convinced myself that it means a vague, universal, positive feeling. I decide within myself, I love all people, check. But like I said earlier, the pandemic has taught me that love is not something I can check off as complete. It is an ongoing need, something that has to be done in a way that can be experienced. Theoretical love doesn't count. Did Jesus actually mean I'm supposed to love my enemies? Like, give them words of affirmation, spend time with them, touch them, serve them, give them gifts? Can I take this commandment that literally? Maybe this commandment is not about an internal virtue test. Maybe it's not about defeating our baser insects, our baser instincts. Maybe we're supposed to love our enemies because it works. I said I would come back to the question of what we are supposed to do about the extremism in our society, which is only increasing. And I find myself thinking of the ways in which I have been changed, the ways in which I have grown over time. And I think, what are the conditions that have led to that growth? Different things, but sometimes, and this is where loving our enemies comes in, sometimes I have grown because of a series of interactions with people that I either feared or disliked. Some of these are people that I had been taught to think of as enemies, but they have changed me by accumulation of many surprising acts of love. The gift of a sandwich, a word of kindness, a time when somebody could have judged me harshly and they didn't. One such act has never been enough for me to overcome a lifetime of conditioning, of being taught that person is someone to fear, but little acts of love over time have helped me grow and learn quite a lot. I didn't need logical arguments. I needed the person in front of me to shine their light by loving me. It seems important at this point to pause and remind all of us, including me, that loving your enemies is not the first step. The first step goes all the way back to Elijah. Have a nap and a snack. Then make sure you feel physically safe. Be secure in your identity and make sure you are receiving and giving love. After that, do the same for your immediate community. Food, water, rest, physical safety, identity, love. Without these two steps, we are just like Elijah, who cried out to God, it's too much, because it is, it's too much. If we are not cared for as individuals and communities, it is too much to meet the humans we encounter, including those who are scary, with empathy and with love. Loving our enemies is being our best selves. Last thing, why love in the face of the enormous systemic monsters that are prowling the world? Why love in the face of extremism? Why love in the face of the fractured mirror? It's because there's nothing we can do about the fractured mirror. Technology will not go backwards. From here into the future, there will always be 1,000 different stories. There will be no clear and unified representation of reality. But if the mirror that you are looking in suggests that I am your enemy, there is one way that I can change that story. I can stand in front of you and commit an act of love. Thank you, friends.